Jacobs, who is a Marine Corps veteran and fought in the Vietnam War, and also returned to Vietnam in 2008. So I am very interested in hearing his talk and seeing kind of his comparison and contrast of when he was Vietnam during the war and what the country is like now. 11 October, we're still kind of working on this, but we will have a sort of a resources day, service provider. Those of you who are veterans, definitely encourage you to come that day if you have certain questions for our local Veterans Administration office here in Broomfield. Any sort of questions, we should have some great service providers there that will help guide you in the right direction. October 25th, Gordon Gates is a gentleman who visited Iwo Jima, where his father and his uncle had served. And he has some interesting insight about that battle that was fought there, very monumental battle during World War II. And he will be sharing that with us. Next one. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Fred. I think most of you probably know Fred Martin right here. And he is going to fill you in on a little bit on his experience researching. Uh-oh, did we lose it? We got it. We got it. We're good.
Okay.
So, Fred, go ahead.
I'm not sure, is my microphone working okay? Okay. I want to welcome our guests from Kipling Meadows and from the Village Co-op. Thank you so much for being here. Is Dottie here? Yeah. Oh, hi, Dottie. See, I want to do a future presentation on Dottie. I have talked to Susan, and you had a brother. Yeah. Maurice, shot down over Europe in his B-17 and rescued by the French underground. Also, my neighbors, Dan and Renee. We meet each other in the park frequently, walking dogs. Uncle was shot down over Europe in a B-17, and the Nazis imprisoned him by a small aerodrome, and he stole a French airplane and flew to freedom. So those would be neat stories to put together. And so without further, we've kind of used up some time on introductions. I think it's fair to warn the audience, how long is this guy going to keep prattling on, and when do we get out of here? I read a script because I just have a lot of stuff on this topic to shove in here, but I can read through this in 50 minutes. So just so you're pre-warned.
That's our bladder limit.
Yeah. So it is a privilege to give this presentation of Colorado Airmen on the India-China airlift, the Himalayan Hump operation. This was commissioned by the Colorado Pilots Association and the FAA Education Program for a national Zoom that we did last month. I've adapted this presentation from one I've given here at the museum and to many organizations since 2008 about my father's flights over the hump. I've been blessed to have these audiences. But this is a new presentation placing a focus on several Colorado-related airmen of the Hump operation. Some I've personally known or I've known their families. So Colorado focus. One other preface note, if it seems I'm giving too much airtime to my own dad, it's because I've selected excerpts from his letters from India that were common experiences for most Hump airmen and illustrate the rigors of the CBI operation that most crews endured. The Himalayan Hump operation, pioneering aviators carried thousands of tons of gasoline and material across the highest terrain on Earth to supply B-29 bases in the interior of China that were poised for early bombing missions on Japan. It was the highest risk, highest loss air transport mission of the war. Flight operations had never been attempted over the planet's highest and most rugged mountains, much less on a year-round, all-weather basis. Winds were measured at over 250 miles per hour. Yes, 250 is actually true. And downdrafts were encountered of over 3,000 feet per minute. Add to that the intensely hazardous payload of thousands of gallons of gasoline carried on these flights, usually lashed in 55-gallon drums. Over 10,000 tons were carried across the hump per month. In all, 650,000 tons were delivered over the Himalayas. The cost was the deaths of over 1,300 aircrew and more than 600 aircraft lost. There were nearly 1,200 bailouts over the hump. 345 men were never found and are listed as missing in action. General Claire Chennault, the region's air commander, said that only men of special caliber could live up to the demands of the hump. They were the swashbuckling pilots of the India-China wing. Now, I found that most hump histories don't clearly explain how the operation came about. It starts with Pearl Harbor, which is often seen as a singular defining event. Yet it was just the first step in a complex Japanese plan that was so rapidly executed on such a global scale that the scope and speed of this campaign rivals any military campaign in history. Immediately after disabling much of the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese sealed off their homeland along with China and then exploded across the Pacific with incredible speed. They fortified Pacific island chains so that Allied air retaliation could not reach Japan from the Pacific. The Doolittle raid from an aircraft carrier 4 months later was the first U.S. bombing attack on Japan. The day after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces attacked the Philippines, eventually capturing MacArthur's Allied troops. MacArthur vowed to return. They moved into Indochina, Thailand, down the Malay Peninsula to overwhelm British Singapore. They took the Dutch East Indies. Australia and Alaska were threatened. The Axis powers now held over 1/3 of the planet. By that grim December 1941, Japan was poised to move next on India. If they cut off access to China via the Burma Road from the seaport of Rangoon, the Allies could not supply China. Then, on Christmas Eve, 1941, they did just that. Japan brutally attacked British Burma and seized Rangoon. Now, here's a question, class. How long did it take the Japanese to go from Pearl Harbor to Rangoon to utterly isolate China and control the Pacific? Well, it was accomplished between December 7th and December 24th in 2 weeks. This certainly exceeded Japan's own expectations for the campaign. We can only imagine the astonished jubilation in Tokyo Command Headquarters in stark contrast to the panic it brought to Washington and throughout Allied command. With the Burma Road cut off, an attempt was made to build a new road, the Ledo Road, connecting India to the Burma Road in the north. Churchill called it an immense, laborious task, unlikely to be completed until the need for it has passed. 20,000 engineers and 35,000 natives labored for 2 years to open the Ledo Road from India to China. When finally completed, truck caravans took over a month to cross the 800 miles to China, over grades up to 17%, and under continuous Japanese air attacks. Churchill was nearly correct. The road was completed less than a year from the war's end. So for the enormous requirements of the China base operations, it became clear that ground transport on the Ledo Road was not practical. The transport problem would be solved by airlift over the highest terrain on Earth. The Hump operation completed the longest material supply line in the world. After the 12,000-mile ocean voyage from the U.S. to Karachi or Bombay, shipments traveled 1,500 miles on India's dilapidated rail lines. Then every bean and bullet, as one commander put it, had to be flown from bases in Assam over into China. General Chennault estimated that for every ton of bombs delivered to Japan, 18 tons of material had to be flown over the Hump. Now here's a quick digression. No matter how much one studies any aspect of World War II, it's impossible to capture the complete God's eye view of events. There's always something else critical to the story to discover. Recently, I've been studying General Claire Chennault. It could be said that the India-China airlift began with him as far back as 1937. He went to work for Chiang Kai-shek and his wife, Madam Chiang. She had a major influence on the war. She had an astute grasp of the strategic big picture, and she had a charm offensive towards Chennault, Roosevelt, and the American public. By one account, Chennault was a little sweet on Madam Chiang. So it was for her and China that Chennault assembled the renegade AVG, American Volunteer Group, the Flying Tigers. And this is while American command stood off still in isolationism. With a small ragtag group of P-40s, they inflicted major damage on Japanese air forces, sometimes with just 10 or 12 fighters against squadrons of bombers. They got the Hump airlift going by 1941 to supply Chinese ground troops. By late 43, Chennault influenced Roosevelt to deploy the 20th Air Force, the B-29 bomber group, through China. So my story here is in 1944 when Hump crews were flying gasoline over the mountains for the B-29 operations. Here's another digression. When Dad first arrived in Sukarating, India, lonely, not knowing where he was headed to next, he went to the outdoor theater for diversion. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a fellow staring at him. He looked, the fellow turned away, then they looked back. It was Dad's boyhood companion from the Southwest Virginia mountains, cousin Frank Osborne. Neither knew the other was even in the war. It was a chance encounter in this altogether remote end of the earth. Frank was a P-40 pilot with the Flying Tigers. My grandmother was his Aunt Minnie Flora. This was a time when farm and city kids who had never been far from home were sent to all ends of the earth. The world wars globalized thousands of the plain folk of America, and the far reaches of the earth began to become Americanized. Hump crews flew over regions never before seen by human eyes. These were pioneering aviation routes. Minyakonka is the highest peak in eastern Sichuan. At this time, it was thought to be higher than Everest. This is a 1-inch Kodachrome slide taken by my dad from the pilot's seat. It's my favorite picture in the collection. Note the monsoon flow piling up against the mountains. By the way, to date, only 22 climbers have ever reached the summit. 16 have died in the attempt. The numbers for Everest are 4,000 on the summit, 250 deaths. The Brahmaputra River flows down from the great Himalayan ranges of Tibet, China, and Burma through the Assam province at the eastern extremity of India. Along that river, amidst tea plantations and rice paddies and flowering jungles that are known for a rare species of black tigers that lives there, sits the city of Tezpur. It is a name from an ancient Hindu warrior legend, meaning the city of blood. There, the Army had built one of a series of air bases along the river, positioned for missions over the high mountains to China. Tezpur was a C-87, C-109, B-24 base. Several other bases nearby included Sukarating and Chabua, and others from where the C-47s and C-46s flew. Tezpur was my dad's base. The air route over the Hump rose out of the river valley to the northeast over the 10,000-foot Naga Hills, named for the headhunting tribe that lived there. Then it crossed the gorges of the Irrawaddy, Salween, and Mekong rivers and on up to the backbone of the Hump, the Sant Sung ranges of eastern Sichuan and Tibet. Pilots referred to the route as the Aluminum Trail because of the number of airplanes lost along it. My book provides some technical review of the C-87 that Dad flew. Ernest Gahn, a favorite aviation writer in his book Fate is the Hunter, wrote how he hated the airplane, going on at length deriding it for almost killing him numerous times. On C-87 mountain performance, he remarked, "They could not carry enough ice to chill a highball." The C-87 had been hastily derived from the B-24 platform, leading to many problems. Gahn wrote, "They were an evil bastard contraption, nothing like the relatively efficient B-24 except in appearance. The assembly of parts known collectively as a C-87 would never replace an airplane." The B-24 was designed as a bomber with fixed bomb racks. When those were replaced with a long flat floor, off-center of gravity loading killed many crews. And the B-24 was designed to drop its payload in flight. The nose wheel then was not stressed to land fully loaded on gravel strips and often collapsed in hump operations. Another B-24 derivative Dad flew was the C-109, which had built-in fuel tanks. C-109s burned 3 times as much fuel getting there as they delivered. The Rube Goldberg tangle of cross-feed lines were leaky and fraught with fumes. The India-China-Burma theater of war was called the Forgotten Theater of World War II. Most Americans had only a foggy notion of the area as legends in storybooks. This recently published Nat Geo in the grocery store checkout devotes a grand total of 1 sentence to the India-China airlift and no maps. By the way, this is the same size, format, and print quality and almost the same price as my book. Forgive that shameless advertisement on my part. So just getting to Assam, India was a flight of epic proportion. My dad was assigned to deliver an Army C-47 from Wilmington, Delaware. That's the base he had flown B-17s to Europe from, to Sukarating, India. Nowadays, you can fly British Airways from Denver to Delhi in a day, day and a half. Dad's flight to India took 22 days and a total of 95 flight hours. He wrote about his frustrations with his kindergarten crew. A flight engineer inadvertently shut down the engines over the Amazon jungle, and the navigator was lost most of the way. This was a time when kids barely emerged from high school were learning by doing, flying complex aircraft all over the world. The year before, it took Dad about a month to deliver a B-17 to England and return stateside for another. In historical perspective, the United States built nearly 300,000 aircraft for World War II. Just the logistics of delivering that many airplanes all over the planet defies belief. This wonderful book by Bob Buck describes this South American-African route to war and brings these flights and primitive air bases to life. My dad told me about the C-47's performance. He said, "Don't expect it to stay aloft for very long on one engine." The C-47's performance envelope is similar to a single-engine Cessna 210. That leg from Natal to Ascension Island is 1,600 miles, requiring 8.5 long hours, 6 in the dark. Pilots advised each other to place their faith in a holy trinity: God, Pratt and Whitney. Dad had just arrived when the commander of operations issued a directive that no flights were to be canceled or delayed because of weather. This order was widely referred to as the "there will no longer be weather" decree, and pilots quipped that if the weather could be thus ordered away, perhaps a similar order could be issued to the Japs. Weather had closed the route to China half the time. At the Tezpur base, aircraft were crashing regularly on takeoff in horrific fireballs. Flights were frequently lost to Japanese attackers and for reasons unknown. In early June, the ship of the chief pilot went missing, then another colleague crashed. This was the tragic routine at these bases.
Is that your dad?
Yes. He wrote, "Mother, he's in the hospital with broken bones. Some of his crew were not so fortunate. Our safety record here has just gone flop the last few days. 2 crews lost, 1 definitely all killed, the other missing. Haney's still in the hospital in China. Bill Shaughnessy is okay, except for missing most of his teeth. Sure wish the enemy would just fold up, but I can't see it for a mighty long time. To listen to Jap broadcasts from Shanghai, you would think that they are going to win." I have enjoyed the help of Clayton Cools of MIArecoveries.org. They conduct expeditions into the Himalayas to locate wreckages of Hump aircraft. They have found 27 missing aircraft and 279 personnel listed for decades as missing in action. Clayton wrote me a couple months back and said that when reaching a crash site, often after days or weeks trekking through mountain jungles, he feels the presence of those men. That's why he has spent over $100,000 of his own funds to conduct these expeditions. He told me there is nothing else he would rather be doing with his life. You may donate at mirecoveries.org. The India-China airlift was a non-combat operation. That imparted an added sense of tragedy to the frequent crashes. If an airline suffered such multiple crashes each week, with many right at the airport, then what pilot would continue flying and what passenger or crew member would ever board the aircraft? Air bases were built employing native labor. Entire families worked on India bases, while in China, rock crushers, mostly women, broke gravel using hammers, then carried it to the airstrip in baskets on their heads. Up to 100,000 coolies worked on each China base. Construction equipment was scarce. Ox carts were used to haul rock. Hand-drawn rollers, pulled by 100 coolies or more, flattened the field. The result was a bumpy airfield about 6,000 feet in length. Now, I want to emphasize the rigors and physical challenges of these flights. A typical flight from Dad's logbook was an 8 to 10 hour round trip. These came back to back, day to day, on an unrelenting schedule. Now, for perspective, with all respect to your airline pilots, for me it's a mild form of torture to sit in a modern airline seat for 10 hours. I'd hate to do it 8, 9, 10 days in a row, month after month. At least it's heated, pressurized, and sometimes they serve beer and pretzels. But the C-87, C-47, C-46 were freezing cold the whole way, unpressurized, and you had to wear an oxygen mask. In a letter to Mom, Dad wrote, "I am so tired and dopey that I really don't know what I'm doing half the time." He wrote, "It sure gets dark out over that 1,000 miles of stone at night. That is, until we hit the roughest weather yet last night, and the storms lit things up like day. We were barely getting over the top of the thunderclouds, and when we broke clear, we were flying among stars above the storm." That's the passage that gave the title for my book. A few days later, he wrote, "I need a good cry tonight, but just can't. One of our finest friends, one of the best fellows I've met, was killed last night. His ship crashed and burned right after takeoff. On takeoff in a tanker loaded to full gross weight with gasoline, the airplane is sluggish. It's balanced on a tight wire of airspeed wherein single mile per hour increments make all the difference between a climb beyond hill or trees or mushing back to the ground. A backfiring engine, a downdraft, a payload slightly off center of gravity, a momentary lapse in concentration were only some of the factors that could bring down the airplane." Now, let me read a series of logbook entries from Dad's 66 missions. These are typical for all pilots. I want to give you a sense of the unrelenting pace of operations. On September 3rd, there was a 10.5-hour trip to and from Chengdu. The next day, 9 hours, 45 minutes to and from Penshang. The next day, 11 hours to Quanghan, then Quanghan again on both the next 2 days. There was no time to worry over the deaths of other pilots. The most imminent enemy was crushing fatigue. Just one of these trips over the hump was a flight of expeditionary proportion at this time in aviation history. 2 days later, keep me on my slide. 2 days later, Dad flew his 40th trip over the hump to Penshang. The next day, he flew flight number 41 back to Penshang and Sukarating. The next day, 10.5 hours to Quanghan, then another round trip to Quanghan on the same day. That was an unimaginable 22 hours of flying the Himalayas in one 24-hour period after one night off in 10 consecutive days of such flights.
Fred, how many crew members would be in one of those typical flights?
Thank you. 4.
4. And pilot?
Pilot, co-pilot, loadmaster, radio man.
Gotcha. Navigator?
Does that add up to 4? Maybe they're double duty. The next day, Dad wrote Mother a letter. Did you hear? We bombed Japan yesterday. It was B-29s from our theater. This is what the massive effort was all about, hauling all this gasoline over the mountains. He went on, I can't answer your question about where the B-29s are. It's secret. Only the Japs and a couple million other people know where they're based. These letters were censored. They sure are big, though. He had no idea at that moment that he would be a B-29 commander in 10 months. These B-29 missions through Kwang Han defy belief. Flying from Calcutta over the Hump, they landed in Kwang Han to refuel and load ordnance. Then the incredible round trip to bomb Japan, back to refueling Kwang Han, then return to Calcutta where the bombers were safer from Japanese attack. The B-29 was new and not fully proven. In raids in mid-1944 on Japan, only 5% of bombs hit targets. 100 aircraft were lost, most to mechanical failures. These were the first bombing attacks on Japan since the Doolittle raid 2 years earlier. So morale value was high, but actual strategic value of all this effort over the Hump was far below the best hopes. General Curtis LeMay, in charge of B-29 operations, was waiting for Tinian and Guam to be secured so that the 29s could be moved to Pacific bases. The father of my good friend Margaret Schmidt, a Denver psychologist who specialized in PTSD, was Captain William Wellinger, who flew these India to Japan missions. He named his giant bomber after his wife and daughter, Margaret, and this 1943 Robert Young-Lorraine Day film, it was a movie that portrayed the horrors of aerial bombardment in London at a time when Hollywood was focused on heroics to sell war bonds. I think that name revealed a very poignant pathos in the heart of Marty's dad. From the movie, it was an acknowledgement of what was happening 30,000 feet below, but the name of wife and daughter was a reminder that he was flying those dire journeys to protect loved ones back home. Margaret had only a sparse record of her father's war service. The logbooks had been lost, he never told stories, and confusingly, she had photos of 2 different journeys for Margaret. She knew that he had flown in the Pacific, had crashed with 6 of his crew killed, but how did that connect to the Hump? After internet research, I found this photo on the first journey for Margaret, taken by a passerby on Tinian Island, and it was posted just recently on Flickr. This was before the crash. Afterwards, we discovered that Wellinger was redeployed to India and assigned a new aircraft. Here is the second journey for Margaret that he flew on missions to Japan. Margaret became a supporter of my work and even joined our family entourage to my dad's Aviation Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Wichita. It was part of her quest as daughter and psychologist to understand a father she loved but who was emotionally distant after the war, whose psyche had become complicated by war experiences he was unable to talk about. He named that huge bomber after her. She chose her counseling career because of him. 3 years ago, I met Alex Dominic by happenstance in a bar. After a couple, we discovered that our dads were stationed in Tezpur flying C-87s at the same time and had even flown a check flight together. Alex also wrote a book about his dad. He published his father's India war diaries in this book. His dad, Peter Dominic, became the first partner at Holland & Hart, Colorado's largest law firm, then congressman, then U.S. Senator from Colorado, and ambassador to Switzerland. Years after the war, both our dads contracted multiple sclerosis. More on that in a few moments. Dominic's diaries were a chance discovery by his son Alex, as were my dad's records and letters to mother. Here are a couple excerpts that you'll find in Alex's book, pre-recorded so that I can repair my voice for a couple minutes. This first passage may reflect his dad's budding political leaning.
I didn't feel I had been worth $360 per month for the government, and at times I was embarrassed to take it. Wages are supposedly paid for hard work, responsibility, and ideas. In this game, flying is mostly fun. The danger certainly doesn't compare to that of a private in the Marines attacking Tarawa. Now, another excerpt from the book shows Dominic's flying skills. Remember, this is a 4-engine transport aircraft. Over tally, the plane did its best to turn over 4 times. Schnitz and I were both using full controls, throttle wide open and stick full forward. 60 degrees from one side to the other it lurched, and then slowly straightened out. We lost 2,800 feet. The maneuvers were so violent, there wasn't a chance of getting out of the ship. 40 minutes later, the number 1 engine, manifold pressure, and tachometer started dancing around, and the engine ran away. I tried to feather the engine. I cut the mixture, turbo, booster pump, throttle, ignition, and gas pump, and kept it at 2,500 RPM. Then number 2 started to do the same. Sent the crew chief back to dump the load and got the radio man to send a distress signal. It was obvious that with only 2 engines, we'd have to bail out. Then the crew chief came up to tell me the lurch I just felt was caused by having the rear door go through the tail while falling off. I gave the word to prepare to bail out and then notified all stations of our position. Then I thought of a fighter strip fairly close to us and I headed for that. Number 1 prop was flat side to the breeze and caught fire. We were down to 8,000 feet and still losing altitude. Then the fighter strip turned their homing beacon off. Managed to radio them to get it back on. On the downwind leg, I found we couldn't make the pattern, lost all flight instruments and number 2 engine. Edged into the hills over the trees, took one last look, cut power, and made a 45-degree banking 180-degree approach, dropping flaps and gear at the same time. Luckily, they came down. Aimed short of the runway and plowed through sand on final. When I started flare out, the nose wouldn't come up. Stood up and yanked on the elevators. It eased over a ditch and we stopped 2/3 of the way up a 4,000-foot runway. Dominic also wrote of a friend's experience at the same time. Heller's ship flew into a thundercloud which was so rough it spilled their gyro instruments. They were in a spiral and couldn't get it out. Heller yelled to bail out. The ship, in a tight spiral and an indicated airspeed of 300 miles per hour, hit an air pocket and tore a wing off the plane. The center section of the wing is over the flight deck, and Cariotti was sucked out and lost consciousness. He didn't have his chute buckled up and was hanging by one arm when he came to. He pulled his ripcord and landed okay. No word yet on any of the other crew members.
Here at the Veterans Museum is a display board on Peter Dominic. I am suggesting they upgrade it to show that as senator, he sponsored the legislation requiring emergency locator transmitters, which have saved thousands of lives since then. Now, my own experience with ELTs, like some of you other pilots, was limited to renting a small Cessna, bringing it back in an ungraceful landing, and then waking up that night worried. Did I check to be sure that ELT was off? Hard jolts trigger them, and if left on, you fear an angry call from the FAA. Here's the importance of ELTs that Dominic gave to aviation. 2 years ago, I did a tribute to Bill Bacon here at the museum. He's in the back. It's at their YouTube channel. Bill was not a Hump airman, of course. He was a naval aviator much later, then an FAA flight inspector who issued over 4,500 flight certificates for Colorado pilots, including my own in 1979. He was a recipient of the FAA Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award, and here he is receiving a Find Award from Governor Love. Prior to the ELT requirement, Bill found a lost Cessna 182 on Corona Pass. Then he hiked up with the recovery team. He had discovered the wreck in a flyover in the spring after snowmelt. The crash had occurred on New Year's Eve. At the site, they found the comm radios were tuned to the emergency frequency, but the crash had knocked the battery loose. There were signs the pilot had survived and tried to bivouac in the snow. Had there been an ELT on board, he likely would have been found the next day by the airplanes that had gone out searching. A couple months after Alex and I started doing presentations together, I noticed in Dad's logbook that he had flown a check ride with an instructor, Dominic, at Tezpur. I called Alex to check this with his dad's logbook. It did note my dad's name. It was also confirmed in a letter home to Mother written the next day. So just imagine 2 men fly a check ride together at a remote airbase in India. 78 years later, their sons meet by chance in a bar in Colorado to tell the story. The Veterans Museum has a precious collection of records and artifacts from Hump pilot Lieutenant William Harris. Logbooks, flight records, charts, distinguished flying cross photos. These were discovered in an abandoned storage locker in Denver. The storage facility brought them to the museum. Seeking his heirs, I traced public records to 2 homes owned by his widow and daughter in Denver. I found a voter registration record for his son in Colorado, and I found William and wife Lola Jean together at Fort Logan. There the trail ended. We have not been able to locate daughter or son or grandkids to reunite them with these precious family heirlooms of their heroic father. Perhaps that's a cautionary tale for families who've not preserved war records and photos of family veterans. Let me know if we may assist. In doing family and warrior history research, things do happen that cannot be coincidence. I like to say the ancestors want their stories told, and at times they throw it in our faces. I came here to the museum to photograph Harris's artifacts. The museum curator searched on the computer and sent me to the wrong file. It was for Colorado Hump pilot I did not know, Lieutenant Eldon Leitz. His file unexpectedly surfaced in the search for Harris. His sons Paul and John live in Colorado. Paul is a Navy submarine veteran, and he would be here today except he's having foot surgery. John told me a story about his father I had never heard in Hump lore. I knew of the fierce Gurkha warriors, the renowned allies of British forces in Burma, but not this. At Leitz's base, aircraft tires were hard to requisition, so they had coolies grow rice paddies or tall grass at the end of airstrips. Pilots would then approach low, dragging through the grass to start the tires turning so they scuffed less when hitting the ground. But Japanese infiltrators hid in the grass to shoot at the airplanes. The Gurkhas took care of that, holding these weapons to their throats. If that failed to pacify the intruders, the small blade was used to gouge out eyeballs. John said that this kukri knife was given to his father by a Gurkha friend, and it was used just that way, but it's been cleaned of blood. After the war, Leitz was in the Japanese occupation forces. Then he went to work for Challenger Airways in Arizona, which became Frontier Airlines. And he was in the Air Force Reserve Air National Guard, flying the giant C-97 all over the world, including flights to Vietnam. The Hill Air Force Museum in Ogden has a C-97. It's one of those airplanes you stand under and you just can't believe something that big can fly. Pilots called them Old Shaky. Leitz retired with an incredible 34,000 hours in his log. Both Harris and Leitz flew the C-46 Commando. It had similar performance to the smaller C-47, but nearly twice the cabin size and weight, both empty and loaded. The C-46 used 2,100 horsepower engines, the C-47 1,100 horsepower. The Commando was the most iconic Allied aircraft carrying supplies over the Himalayas. Like the C-47, a few remain in service today. Notably, C-46s fly in Arctic conditions in northern Canada and Alaska. So these World War II aircraft and engines were designed just over 30 years after the Wright brothers. Now, more than 80 years later, they're still in use, proving the incredible durability and reliability of airplanes of the World War II era. In 2007, while I was writing my book, this full-page article appeared in the Broomfield Enterprise about Orlindo Geraro. Of course, I looked him up at his home on 3rd Avenue. He and wife Elsie had me over to their home and then came to my home to review the first slideshow I was putting together. He was a major resource and encouragement for me and is in the acknowledgments of my book. Orlindo flew 130 missions over the Hump in various roles: radio man, loadmaster, navigator. He flew the C-47, C-87, and B-24 based at Chaboa. Orlindo told of the incident where he was loadmaster on a Hump flight 2 days after the Normandy D-Day. A gasoline drum spilled and the airplane exploded on takeoff. Geraro was engulfed in flames. Fire was in his face, he said. I put my hands on the fuselage and to get out, and the skin came right off. My father and many others had a similar experience. In severe turbulence, he had a barrel burst and 55 gallons of gasoline spilled out on the deck, flowing into arcing electric relays and red glowing vacuum tube radios. He wrote, "Mother, there was no reason the aircraft didn't explode." Dad's log entry for that flight has the rather understated notation, "returned with leaky gas drum." In 2016, we lost Orlindo at the age of 97. It's a long life well lived. I was honored to have worked with him on this story. The son of Captain Robert Erickson, Bob Erickson, was 4 years old when his father returned home from flying the Hump and began flying for a domestic airline. He flew the DC-3, the civil version of the C-47 he had flown in the India-China airlift. Bob Jr. has been the events coordinator for the Broomfield Rotary Club. His father's logbooks and other records have been lost, but history tells of the hazardous flights Captain Erickson flew over the Himalayas. A few minutes ago, I told of my father flying the C-47 over the ocean. Now imagine Erickson's 10-hour flights, fully loaded, over the highest, most impassable terrain on Earth. The C-47's service ceiling is about 23,000 feet. Many Hump routes average 20,000 ASL. The C-47's single-engine service ceiling was far, far below that rock pile. Erickson's experience over the Hump more than qualified him to fly the domestic DC-3 across California, yet tragically he was killed in a crash there. The highest mountains in California barely top 13,000 feet, but can be just as hazardous in weather conditions. So Bob Jr. was 4 or 5 when he lost his hero father. He attended my earlier Hump presentation and arranged for my talk at the Rotary Club. Lieutenant Henry Pete Sadig was also a C-47 pilot. His son, Pete Jr. of Cortez, Colorado, was 4 months old when his father was shot down somewhere between Assam and Chanyi, China. He is listed as MIA KIA. I mentioned Clayton Cools and MIArecoveries.org. He watched this presentation when I did it on Zoom for the Colorado Pilots Association and FAA. He then wrote me, "I'll research the Henry Pete Sadig case. I have a network of contacts in China who can assist me with the search mission for his missing C-47. So again, if you have an interest in MIAs, Clayton's work is a very worthy cause. Go to miarecoveries.org and discover more about it. The U.S. Army also has a renewed program to locate some of the 70,000 World War II MIAs. The Secretary of the Army announced the missing soldier policy and formed the People First Task Force with the mission of using 21st century technology to advance the search. Pete Jr. has submitted DNA to the program as recently as 18 months ago and is in touch with the Army Past Conflict Reparations Branch. Pete Jr. is a certified flight instructor and continues to fly as Rockwell Commander. He was a Navy veteran in submarine nuclear technology. Folks, it's a blessing to assist families in discovering the stories of their heroes. Many veterans didn't talk much about the war. They couldn't share such intensity of experience, and that denies memory excavation for history. The epic narrative remains with them. Untold, it's a shadow without a body. Families may have some photos in boxes, and they might recall snippets of stories told by parents and grandparents. If you have an interest in the story of a heroic relative, maybe we can offer some of the historical context. Feel free to call. It's worth a chat, and it can result in some amazing discovery. I mentioned my belief that the ancestors want their stories told. As a history researcher, I tell you, there are tangible signals. It gives us a discourse with them, as the biblical Paul put it, as if through a glass darkly. If you listen to them, they'll teach you a lot about yourself. Paul, in this Corinthians passage, refers to being inspired by the tongues of angels. I've had that experience time and again. I mentioned that Dominic's diary and my father's records were a chance discovery seemingly beyond possible coincidence. 10 years after his passing, I dug into my dad's scrapbooks and shoeboxes. He had left a short autobiography, but it was all about his later years with the Cessna Aircraft Company. All he wrote about World War II, everything I tell here, and much, much more in my book, was a total of 6 sentences. So the story would have been lost, except for my mother. After her own illustrious career in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, we had to move to an Alzheimer's care facility. I cleaned out her home. Hidden in a secret drawer were 211 letters my father had sent home from India. It's almost a letter each day of his tour. Intimate details of flights and daily life in India. And the letters correlated with his pilot logbooks and the crumbling photos in shoeboxes, allowing me to assemble the priceless story. So what is the personal value of delving into these histories? Well, for me, like some of you, I was blessed with many boyhood adventures with my dad, yet had I not discovered these heirlooms and undertaken this project, I would not have fully known who my father was in life without knowing what he experienced and endured as a World War II aviator. And it explains much of what came later in our lives. So I enjoy helping others with their history. Most Hump pilots and crews were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and Air Medal. For families that have them, they are a precious heirloom. One more quick video.
Military aviators have always captured a special place in the hearts and minds of Americans. Only the best and most courageous are awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. The Distinguished Flying Cross has been awarded to such notables as Charles Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart, President George H.W. Bush, Tuskegee Airman General Benjamin O. Davis, General Jimmy Doolittle, actor James Stewart, and numerous astronauts including John Glenn and James Lovell.
The citation that was read with the presentation of the DFC to most Hump pilots and crew would sum up this entire presentation. It reads in part, for extraordinary achievement in more than 600 hours of operational flight over the dangerous and difficult Assam-China air routes where enemy interception and attack was probable and expected, flying at high altitudes over impassable mountainous terrain through extremely treacherous weather conditions, necessitating long periods of operation on instruments, encountering severe icing conditions, and mechanical difficulties requiring courageous and superior performance to overcome. They accomplished their missions with distinction. Their heroic achievement in the face of hazards and difficulties faced continuously with steadfast devotion to duty reflects much credit on themselves and the Army Air Forces of the United States.
In December 1944, another crew was lost and pilots were refusing to fly. He wrote, "There are several who are afraid to fly the Hump, and some of them we used to think of as rocks. One captain was court-martialed when he refused. We lost a ship yesterday, or I should say another one, and everyone is jittery. I don't enjoy this, but the scariest part for me is working with crew members who are afraid. You never know what to expect from them." After a crash, Dad went to the hospital. "There were 5 aboard," he wrote Mother, "all real badly hurt. I gave a transfusion to the pilot so I can't fly again for another day. He died a few minutes later, which doesn't speak too well for my blood, but he was so badly mangled and broken, and it's a miracle he lived even a minute. Another one is being operated for multiple skull fractures, and chances aren't too good. Somehow, this crash doesn't bother me a bit, but the last one I told you about had me pretty upset. Several ships have just disappeared en route. The Japs have gotten a couple, and with all the crashes going on, you get so that it's just another one." In late December, just before Dad's last flight over the Hump, Tokyo Rose, the Japanese radio propagandist, said in her broadcast that pilots crossing the Hump would die and never return. Dad wrote Mother about what Rose had said, and he remarked, "Now you better start worrying about me." His 66th and last trip over the Hump was flown amid a flurry of alerts on the day after Christmas, 1944. On that flight, they had to circle Chung Kung for 4 hours, waiting for a Japanese attack on that base to end before finally receiving landing clearance. Back in Tezpur, as he taxied in and shut down the empty C-109 for the last time, I imagine that he walked away with very little regret. I'm out of time to discuss the many incidents in my book from Dad's letters and logs that describe the traumas that most Hump crews experienced. There were many colleagues lost in fiery crashes right at the base. It almost happened to Dad one foggy night when he collided with another tanker on takeoff and barely got the wildly yawing C-109 airborne with 6,000 gallons of gas on board. There were many pursuits by Japanese fighters called three-ball alerts. A common pilot experience was carrying Japanese soldiers back to India. Several in this photo died in Dad's airplane on a 6-hour flight with no oxygen and sub-zero temperatures. And the stories are common of coolies dashing in front of propellers on takeoffs to kill their pursuing evil spirits. Dad and many others had those near misses as well. Most of his letters, though, were about his fondness for Hindu families he befriended. He bicycled into the jungle to visit with them as often as he could. He wrote, "They gave me coconuts and pineapples. I could have had enough food for a week if I'd taken it, and they didn't have enough for themselves." Warriors suffer many losses far from the battles long after the war. Dad contracted multiple sclerosis years later. He thought the cause was his long exposure to carbon monoxide and fuel fumes in old airplanes. The Mayo Clinic, where he received his treatment, had suggested that. Senator Dominic thought his MS was from a post-war trip to Mexico. Yet more recent research has also revealed a viral cause of neurodegenerative diseases and suggests that the Epstein-Barr virus traced to the Indian subcontinent might be a common cause of both MS and Alzheimer's disease. I bring out this issue in my talks and books if other families are wondering about such a disease cause. With a viral causation, perhaps there's hope for vaccine in future. Dad wrote of chronic viral illnesses over those months in India, visiting the infirmary frequently. This has caused me to consider a possible implication of this new research. Once the virus infects, it may lay dormant for many years and then find a venereal transmission pathway. After years of caring for both my parents' conditions, in 1994, my mother died of Alzheimer's disease as I held her in my arms. So I now wonder, in light of the new research, was she the final casualty of World War II in this story? When I was young and both my parents were vibrantly alive, I did not know enough to ask for old war stories. The letters written to my mother from Dad in India are a treasure I did not discover until she was moved to a nursing home in the 1990s. She had kept them to herself, deep in a secret drawer. In one letter, Dad had written Mother that he was surprised and happy to learn that she was saving his letters. He wrote her, "Who knows, maybe someday they will become a diary of all this." So here my parents and these other heroes have come together finally to tell you this story. There's one more appeal here to visit miarecoveries.org, send them a contribution. Call me if I may assist with your history. We could discuss what you have over coffee or an adult beverage. Maybe your story should be presented here. As an example of this, forgive one more advertisement. Here's a presentation I very much want to provide for the Veterans Museum, or I'll bring it to your group. I got to do the amazing biography of Elmer Lucky McGinty over at the Grange Hall for about 80 folks, including the mayor and the congressional staff. Have you seen Tom Hanks' wonderful series, Masters of the Air? Lucky lived that history in 29 missions in the time of the Bloody 100th, when in April 1944, 4,500 American airmen were lost in that 1 month. Lucky flew from that same Thorpe Abbotts airfield in England that Hank so accurately portrays. I was able to meet Lucky and interview him right after his 100th birthday. When you hear his incredible story, you'll know how he got his nickname. If you'd like to see this history, let me know, or let the museum folks know. And thanks so much for your kind attention today.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions.
He died just after his 100th.
Oh,
Yeah.
somebody else.
Fred, we thank
Mary.
you so much for this incredible presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell me, for us, how much time have you taken to do this for us? How many years? Thank you very much.
Try to do short, it's an obsession. I kind of reside in the World War II era. One, because my parents were heroes there. Two, because part of my heart's there. You know, I hear Churchill's speech on the finest hour, I tear up. So I don't know if reincarnation's real or not. And I believe World War II was a pinnacle of American civilization. The nation was so united, think about this, that we saved the world from a global fascist threat in under 5 years. Greatness comes from unity. And so that's why I think looking at this era is so important. That didn't answer your question, but
Where did you say William Harris and his wife were buried?
Fort Logan National Cemetery.
Thank you.
Would I be able to tell a very short story based on just what you said about it being different then and now? My father fought in World War II and Korea. He was wounded twice. I just was texting my sister. I have one of his Purple Hearts, and my other sister that lives in Aurora has his other Purple Heart, and my sister that lives in Ohio has his Bronze Star, which I see up there. While he was wounded in Italy, he was bringing back another wounded person and back out of the lines, and he got a Bronze Star for that. But here's the point of the story. My father didn't talk about the wars at all. He just wouldn't. But there is one thing that he said. He was in a place where they had captured some Germans, and he slapped a German across the face. And he said he's regretted that his whole life. Now, just on the heels of Charlie Kirk dying, you look at the difference in the way people are looking at that today without any respect for who that man was. And here my father, just in one act of seeing all of his friends killed by the Germans, regretted, and that's the only story he ever told us about the war.
Okay.
Other questions out there for Fred?
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Fred, wonderful presentation. And Fred, as some of you know, has spoken at the museum before. He's spoken before a lot of groups. We would like to offer him this coffee mug as a thank you, token of our appreciation for the museum. I know you're a coffee drinker like I am, so thank you folks very much. And Fred, you wouldn't have a problem with folks coming up and taking a closer look at this here?
This is Lieutenant at the time Leitz's artifacts and his medals and books and so forth.
Okay, wonderful job. Thank you once again. Give him a hand once again. And thank you folks for coming, okay?